The text arrived while I was reorganizing the bookshelves in my apartment. Hey, Zara, given everything that's happened, we think it's best if you don't attend the wedding. Hope you understand. Danielle. My hands didn't shake as I read it. My breath didn't catch. The only sign that my best friend of 15 years had just uninvited me from her wedding via text was a slight tightening around my eyes. I placed my phone face down on the coffee table and continued alphabetizing my mystery novels. Danielle and I had been inseparable since freshman year of college. We'd survived bad breakups, worse haircuts, and the death of her father. We were the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences and knew each other's coffee orders by heart. Or at least we had been. Until Luke. Luke with his perfect smile and hedge fund manager's salary. Luke who'd swept into Danielle's life 18 months ago and slowly, methodically began isolating her from everyone who truly cared about her, especially me. My name is Zara Kareem, and at 33, I'd just received the most casual dismissal in friendship history. But while Danielle was probably curled up with Luke on their designer couch, imagining me devastated by their rejection, I was calmly rearranging my apartment and making plans. I'd spent my childhood moving between London and Karachi with diplomat parents who taught me to observe carefully and plan meticulously. These skills served me well in my career as an art curator, and they served me now as I processed this betrayal from the person I'd considered my chosen family in America. Because the signs had been there for months. The canceled girls' nights, the way she'd stopped sharing details about her relationship, how she'd begun parroting Luke's opinions as if they were her own. 3 months ago, I'd overheard Luke telling her that I was holding her back and that I seemed jealous of their relationship. That same evening, I'd started my contingency plan. Not because I expected this outcome, but because 15 years of friendship had taught me to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. My phone buzzed again with another text. Luke thinks a clean break is better. We'll send back your wedding gift. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. As if uninviting your maid of honor 6 weeks before the wedding was a casual business decision. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my special savings account, the one I'd created specifically for Danielle's wedding gift. See, when Luke proposed, I'd started saving for something extraordinary. Danielle had always dreamed of visiting the Amalfi Coast. She'd covered her dorm room walls with pictures of its dramatic cliffs and azure waters. We'd talked about it during late-night study sessions in college, planned imaginary itineraries during our 20s, promised ourselves we'd go someday when we could afford it. When she got engaged, I decided someday would be her honeymoon. I'd been saving for over a year, putting aside money each month for a surprise honeymoon fund. By the time she sent that text, I had nearly $15,000 set aside, enough for a luxury 2-week trip to the Amalfi Coast for two. Now I had a decision to make. Most people would probably close the account, take the money, and book themselves a nice vacation as consolation for losing a friend. But I'm not most people. And revenge, when served properly, should be both memorable and impossible to misinterpret. I traced my fingers along the spines of the books I'd just organized. Danielle and I had exchanged novels for every birthday since college. I paused at last year's gift from her, a signed first edition of my favorite mystery author's latest work. The inscription read, "To Zara, my eternal partner in crime solving. Love, always, Danielle." That was before Luke had begun his campaign to edge me out of her life. I transferred the funds to my checking account and began researching travel agencies. 3 days later, my doorbell rang. A courier handed me a package. My wedding gift to Danielle and Luke returned as promised. Inside was the antique silver photo frame I'd purchased as their official wedding gift, along with a handwritten note from Danielle. Zara, I'm sorry things ended this way. You were my best friend for so long, but people change. Luke and I need to start our life together without negative influences. I hope someday you'll understand. Danielle. Negative influences. That's what I'd become in their narrative. The bitter single friend jealous of their perfect love story. If only they knew. I placed the frame on my mantle and continued with my plan. The travel agency had been enthusiastic about my surprise gift concept. A honeymoon to the Amalfi Coast as an anonymous present? How romantic! The agent had gushed. If only she knew the full story. I'd been clear about my requirements: five-star accommodations in Positano overlooking the Mediterranean, private boat tours along the coastline, wine tastings at historic vineyards, cooking classes with local chefs, all the romantic cliches Luke would appreciate. More importantly, everything had to be prepaid, non-refundable, and absolutely anonymous. The recipients will receive their itinerary 2 weeks before the wedding, I confirmed with the agent. And they won't know who it's from? Not unless you tell them, she assured me, though I can't imagine keeping such a generous gift a secret. I smiled. Trust me, the surprise is the best part. The next few weeks passed in a strange limbo. Friends who'd been invited to the wedding asked why I wasn't attending. I kept my answers vague, scheduling conflicts or personal reasons, while watching social media for any sign that my gift had been received. I buried myself in preparations for an upcoming exhibition at the gallery where I worked. Art had always been my solace, and now more than ever, I needed the comfort of beautiful things that spoke truth without words. My specialization in South Asian contemporary art had helped me connect with my Pakistani heritage while building my career in New York. Danielle had always supported this part of my identity, attending every exhibition opening and learning about the artists I championed. Luke, on the other hand, had once referred to my career as playing with pretty pictures. Then it happened. 2 weeks before the wedding, Danielle posted a status that made me smile into my morning coffee. Someone gifted us a honeymoon to the Amalfi Coast. Luke and I are freaking out. Who does this? Who are you, amazing person? The post accumulated likes and comments, friends speculating about the generous mystery donor. Luke's comment was particularly satisfying. Whoever you are, you've given us the honeymoon of our dreams. Seriously, reveal yourself so we can thank you properly? I didn't reveal myself. Instead, I watched from a distance as Danielle posted about wedding preparations, now with added excitement about their surprise honeymoon. She looked happy in her photos, genuinely happy, which caused an unexpected pang in my chest. Despite everything, I still cared about her happiness. I just no longer believed Luke was capable of providing it long term. The wedding day arrived. My social media feeds filled with photos of the ceremony and reception. Danielle looked beautiful in her lace gown. Luke looked smugly handsome in his tuxedo. Their first dance, the cake cutting, the sparkler send-off. I watched it all play out through carefully curated images posted by mutual friends. None of them knew about my gift. That was between me, Danielle, Luke, and the travel agency that had arranged everything. That evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the same vintage Danielle and I had shared the night she got engaged. I remembered how excited she'd been then, showing me the ring, talking about how Luke made her feel seen in a way no one else had. I had smiled and toasted to her happiness, swallowing my reservations. Now I wondered if I should have spoken up sooner, if I could have prevented this slow unraveling of our friendship. The morning after the wedding, Danielle posted a goodbye message. Off to the Amalfi Coast with my husband. Still don't know who gifted us this amazing honeymoon, but we are eternally grateful. Blessed year newlyweds, Amalfi Coast. And that's when I implemented the final phase of my plan. See, when I arranged the honeymoon, I included one special instruction. On their third day in Positano, during what was scheduled to be a romantic private dinner on their hotel terrace overlooking the sea, the staff would deliver a special gift, a handcrafted photo album. Inside, beautifully arranged, were 15 years of photographs, Danielle and me through college, our first apartments, vacations, celebrations, losses, inside jokes documented in candid shots, all carefully curated to tell the story of a friendship she had discarded. I had spent weeks assembling it, each page a labor of love and memory. There was us at 19, faces painted for the homecoming game. At 22, in our graduation caps. At 25, moving her into her first solo apartment after she'd left her emotionally abusive boyfriend. I'd included ticket stubs from concerts we'd attended, napkins with inside jokes scribbled on them, dried flowers from bouquets we'd exchanged on birthdays. The final page held just one photo, Danielle and me at her engagement party, arms around each other, both smiling. Below it, I'd written, "Congratulations on your wedding. Enjoy the honeymoon you always dreamed of. Love your negative influence." No anger, no bitterness, just a reminder of everything we'd shared and everything she'd chosen to throw away. The day the album was scheduled for delivery, I turned off my phone and took myself to a spa. I didn't need to witness her reaction in real time. The point wasn't to hurt her, but to make her think, to create a moment of clarity in her honeymoon bubble that might make her question the narrative Luke had constructed about me. As I lay on the massage table, I thought about the first time Danielle and I had gone to a spa together, a cheap place near campus that offered student discounts. We'd giggled through our facials and sworn we'd treat ourselves to a real luxury spa day when we made it. This wasn't how I'd imagined fulfilling that promise. When I turned my phone back on that evening, there were no messages from Danielle, no angry texts from Luke, just silence. I hadn't expected immediate results. In fact, I hadn't really expected any response at all. The gift wasn't about forcing a reconciliation. It was about standing up for myself in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. 4 days later, while I was working from home, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Danielle standing there, still tan from the Amalfi Coast, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "You paid for our honeymoon," she said, her voice somewhere between accusation and bewilderment. I stepped aside to let her in. "Would you like some tea? I still have that orange cardamom blend you like." She followed me to the kitchen, watching as I filled the kettle and set out 2 mugs. The familiarity of the ritual felt bizarre against the tension between us. The last time she'd been in my apartment was before Luke had proposed, when we'd stayed up until 3 a.m. reminiscing about our college days and planning a trip to wine country that never happened. "Why did you do it?" she finally asked. "After everything, after I uninvited you?" I measured tea leaves carefully, buying time to formulate my answer. 15 years is a long time, Danielle. That doesn't just disappear because your husband doesn't like me. "Luke doesn't," she started, then stopped herself. "The album made me cry for hours. Luke was furious when he realized the honeymoon was from you." I imagine he was. I handed her a steaming mug. "Did he let you keep the album?" Her hesitation told me everything. "He said I should return it to you, that accepting it was disrespectful to him." "And what do you think?" I dot. She stared into her tea. "I don't know what to think anymore. Everything's been happening so fast. The wedding, moving into his townhouse, his rules about—" She stopped abruptly. "His rules?" I prompted gently. "It's not like that," she said quickly, defensively. Then, less certainly, "He just likes things a certain way. He wants us to build our own life, with our own friends. Couples friends." I nodded, sipping my tea. And what happens when those friendships don't meet his standards? When those couples don't align with his way of doing things? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "The honeymoon," I said after a moment, "was originally meant to be my wedding gift to both of you. I started saving for it the day after you got engaged. The Amalfi Coast was always your dream." "You remembered that?" Her voice was small. "I remember everything, Danielle. That's what best friends do." I paused, noticing how she flinched slightly at the term best friends. "I remember when you got food poisoning in Prague and I held your hair back all night. I remember when your dad died and you couldn't get out of bed for a week, and I brought you soup and did your laundry. I remember when you helped me reconnect with my Pakistani roots after my grandmother died, and you learned to cook biryani just to make me feel less homesick." Her eyes filled with tears. "That was a long time ago." "Not that long." She placed her mug on the counter, untouched. "I should go. Luke's waiting in the car. He doesn't know I came here." That told me even more than her words had. "Of course he doesn't." She paused at the door. The Amalfi Coast was everything I dreamed it would be: the cliffs, the water, the food. Her voice trailed off. Then, almost inaudibly, "Thank you." I watched from my window as she got into the passenger seat of Luke's luxury SUV. I couldn't see his expression, but his body language, rigid, leaning away from her, spoke volumes. They drove away, and I wondered if my plan had helped or hurt her situation. 3 weeks passed with no contact. I threw myself into work, finalizing the exhibition that would open in the fall. I started taking a pottery class, tried not to check social media for updates on the newlyweds. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, my phone rang with Danielle's ringtone, the song we danced to at our college graduation party, the one I hadn't changed despite everything. "Can I come over?" Her voice was strained, fragile. "Now? Please, Z, I need—" She took a shaky breath. "I just need my friend." 30 minutes later, she was on my couch, a blanket around her shoulders, eyes swollen from crying. "Luke found the album," she said. "I kept it hidden in my desk drawer. He was looking for something else, and—" She twisted her wedding ring anxiously. "He said I betrayed him by keeping it, that I was choosing you over him." "And what did you say?" I kept my voice neutral, though my heart was pounding. "I told him he was being unreasonable, that you were my oldest friend, and the album was full of memories that mattered to me." She looked up, a spark of the old Danielle visible through her tears. "We had our first real fight. I actually stood up to him, Z." I handed her a tissue. "What happened?" "He stormed out, said he needed space to think about whether I was serious about our marriage." She attempted a laugh that came out more like a hiccup. "All because I wouldn't throw away photos of us from college." I wanted to point out that this was exactly the controlling behavior I'd been concerned about, but I knew now wasn't the time. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need." She nodded gratefully. "I just need a few days to figure things out, to think clearly without him telling me what to think." After a pause, she added, "The album really was beautiful, you know. All those memories. I'd forgotten so many of them. Remember when we snuck into that fancy hotel pool in Miami during spring break? And pretended to be guests by ordering those ridiculously expensive cocktails." I finished, smiling despite myself. "We couldn't afford dinner that night because we'd blown our budget on drinks. So we bought hot dogs from that street vendor and ate them on the beach instead. Best meal of the trip," she said, and for a moment we were us again. "That was the point of the album," I said softly. "To remind you of who you were before Luke." She winced at that but didn't argue. Danielle stayed for 3 days. We didn't talk much about Luke, instead, reconnecting over favorite movies and shared memories. I showed her my pottery projects, lopsided bowls and wobbly mugs that made her laugh. She helped me select final pieces for my exhibition, her eye for composition as sharp as ever. It felt like old times, except for the way she checked her phone anxiously when it buzzed, the shadow that crossed her face when Luke's name appeared on the screen. On the 4th morning, she received a text that made her face drain of color. "Luke wants to meet," she said, "to talk things through." "And what do you want?" I asked carefully. She hesitated, running her fingers over the handle of her coffee mug, the one I'd kept specifically for her visits, decorated with a design of her favorite flowers. "I don't know. This isn't how I imagined starting my marriage." "Maybe that's worth thinking about." She gathered her things and hugged me tightly at the door. "Thank you for the honeymoon," she whispered. It was everything I dreamed it would be. The boat tour along the coast, the little villages carved into the cliffs. It was magical. "I know," I said, because I did know. I knew her dreams, her fears, her favorite foods and pet peeves. I knew her in a way Luke never would because he'd never taken the time to really see her. After she left, I didn't expect to hear from her again anytime soon. Luke would pull her back into his orbit, minimize what had happened, isolate her further. That was the pattern with men like him. I'd seen it with my aunt, whose husband had systematically cut her off from our family until she barely recognized herself. It had taken her 15 years to find her way back to us. But 17 days later, I was counting, my doorbell rang again. This time, Danielle stood there with 2 suitcases and red-rimmed eyes that somehow looked more determined than sad. "I left him," she said simply. I pulled her into a hug and helped bring her bags inside. Over tea, the orange cardamom blend she loved, she told me everything, how Luke had forgiven her for keeping the album, but insisted she cut me out of her life completely. How he'd begun checking her phone and questioning her about every outing. How the honeymoon photos she'd posted had been carefully selected by him to project the perfect image of newlywed bliss. He deleted all the pictures I took of the little things I loved. This adorable elderly couple who owned a gelato shop in Positano, a stray cat that followed us in Ravello, the view from our hotel window at sunrise. He said they weren't on brand for our social media. She shook her head. Who says that on their honeymoon? The irony, she continued with a hollow laugh, is that the best part of our honeymoon was the night I got your album. After Luke stormed out of our suite, I sat on the balcony looking through it for hours, remembering who I used to be, who we used to be together. She looked at me. That's when I knew something was wrong. Not with you, with my marriage. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't, she insisted. You woke me up, and it took me a few weeks to accept it, but I'm grateful. Danielle stayed with me while she figured out her next steps. The separation was ugly. Luke refused to accept it was happening, alternating between declarations of love and thinly veiled threats about what would happen if she left. When emotional manipulation didn't work, he tried financial pressure, reminding her how much she'd given up to be with him. He keeps talking about the fancy vacations we won't take, the country club membership we'll lose, she told me one night as we sat on my balcony sharing a bottle of wine. As if that's what makes a life. What did you say to him? I asked. I told him I'd rather have bread and water with friends who love the real me than champagne and caviar, with someone who only loves the version of me he created. She looked surprised at her own words. I don't even know where that came from. I haven't spoken to him like that ever. That's the Danielle I remember, I said, raising my glass in a toast. The one who told off that condescending professor in sophomore year when he said women didn't belong in economics. She clinked her glass against mine. God, I'd forgotten about that. Whatever happened to her? She's sitting right here, I said, just a little older and a lot wiser. What he doesn't realize, Danielle told me another evening as we shared takeout curry and Nyan, is that I gave up much more than he knows. I gave up myself piece by piece until I barely recognized the person in the mirror. Did you know he convinced me to stop wearing that perfume I've loved since college? Said it was too ethnic for the image we needed to project. The perfume had been a gift from me, a scent blended by a Pakistani perfumer that reminded me of my grandmother's garden. It took 7 months for the divorce to finalize. 7 months of Luke's attempts to win her back, to punish her, to control the narrative. 7 months of Danielle rebuilding her confidence and rediscovering her independence. She moved into her own apartment, started therapy, reconnected with friends who'd been pushed aside during her relationship with Luke. She even joined me on a sourcing trip to London and Pakistan for the gallery, rediscovering her love of travel without Luke's controlling itineraries. On the 1-year anniversary of what would have been their wedding day, Danielle and I opened a bottle of champagne in my living room. To the most expensive gift I never gave, I toasted, clinking my glass against hers. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. You know what's funny? Luke still doesn't understand why I left. He tells everyone I had a breakdown after the honeymoon. And what do you tell people? That I had a breakthrough. She took a thoughtful sip. You know, we never did finish the Amalfi Coast itinerary you planned. We came home early after our fight. An idea sparked in my mind. Well, the savings account is still there. It was meant for your dream trip, after all. Her eyes widened. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, I said, refilling our glasses, that 15 years of friendship deserves a proper celebration. What do you say to Amalfi Coast, take 2? No husbands, no drama, just us. Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. I'd say that sounds like the honeymoon I should have had all along. 3 months later, we were on a flight to Naples, the gateway to the Amalfi Coast. As the plane took off, Danielle squeezed my hand. Thank you, she said, for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on us. I squeezed back. That's what real friends do. As we soared above the clouds, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us here. How a wedding uninvitation had led to a honeymoon gift, which led to a broken marriage but a restored friendship. How sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you truly need. Danielle fell asleep against my shoulder, peaceful in a way I hadn't seen her in years. I opened my book and settled in for the long flight, content in the knowledge that some bonds can't be broken. Not by controlling partners, not by distance, not even by our own mistakes. Because when you truly love someone, friend, family, or partner, you don't just love who they are. You love who they were and who they're becoming. And sometimes helping them remember, that person is the greatest gift you can give. Our 2 weeks on the Amalfi Coast were everything Danielle had dreamed of and more. We stayed in the same luxury hotel in Positano that she and Luke had abandoned. But this time, we experienced it fully. We took cooking classes where we learned to make authentic pasta from scratch, hiked the Path of the Gods with its breathtaking views of the Mediterranean, and spent lazy afternoons reading on sun-drenched terraces. We also did things Luke would have deemed wasteful or pointless. We befriended that elderly couple who owned the gelato shop and visited them daily, adopted the stray cat in Ravello for afternoon snuggles, and Danielle took hundreds of photographs of every small detail that captured her heart. The photos we took on the Amalfi Coast were nothing like the carefully curated images from her honeymoon with Luke. They were messy, authentic, full of laughter and inside jokes. My favorite was one of Danielle with gelato dripping down her chin, laughing so hard she could barely stand. We recreated some of our college poses on the beach, added new memories to our shared history, and started planning our next adventure before this one was even over. "What do you think about Morocco next year?" Danielle asked as we sat at a cliffside restaurant in Amalfi, watching fishing boats return to harbor. "Or maybe Japan? I've always wanted to see the cherry blossoms." "Let's do both," I said, raising my glass of local white wine. Life's too short for someday anymore. On our last night, sitting on the terrace of our hotel watching the sunset paint the sea in shades of gold and pink, Danielle turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Do you remember in college when we used to say we were each other's emotional emergency contacts?" I nodded, smiling at the memory. "I forgot that for a while," she continued. "I let someone convince me that your loyalty was interference, that your honesty was negativity." She took my hand. "Thank you for the honeymoon that saved me from my marriage." I squeezed her hand, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "Some gifts aren't about what you get," I said. "They're about what you discover." And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I thought about how sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about helping someone you love find their way back to themselves. Because while Luke had tried to separate us forever, he'd never understood the power of 15 years of friendship. He'd never understood that sometimes the most meaningful gift isn't the one wrapped in pretty paper or delivered to a luxury villa on the Amalfi Coast. Sometimes it's the gift of truth, offered with love, even when, especially when, it's not what someone wants to hear. As we walked back to our hotel, arm in arm, I realized that what had started as revenge had transformed into something far more powerful: redemption. Not just for Danielle, but for our friendship. For the bond that had been bent but never broken. She may have uninvited me to her wedding, but in the end, I'd given her something far more valuable than a honeymoon. I'd given her back herself. And really, what better gift could there be? 6 months later, the exhibition I'd been working on opened at the gallery. It featured contemporary artists exploring themes of identity, belonging, and transformation, concepts that had taken on new meaning for me over the past year. Danielle stood by my side at the opening, champagne in hand, proudly introducing me to guests as my brilliant best friend, the curator. Luke had tried to erase our friendship from existence, but here we were, stronger than before. As I watched Danielle animatedly discussing a painting with one of the artists, I thought about how resilient human connections can be when they're rooted in genuine care. Sometimes it takes a dramatic gesture, like paying for a honeymoon you're not invited to shake someone awake. And sometimes that awakening is worth every penny.